The last part of your project is going to be the largest part, and that's to do a 2-point perspective drawing. And this too is a 3D drawing, and it's worth 40 points. And we're going to draw a city in 2-point perspective. So first of all, let's define what exactly is 2-point perspective. 2-point perspective drawing is where we now have 2 diminishing points. If you remember, before we had 1 diminishing point, and as the back face got further away, it was getting smaller. But now the front edge is closest to us, and we have 2 faces that we can see, the left and the right. And as both of those faces get smaller, heading in different directions, as they get further away, they are getting smaller. So that's why we need 2-point diminishing points here, and that's why it's called 2-point perspective. Notice that all the lines in these drawings that are vertical, going up and down, are all parallel to each other, and all the lines that are horizontal are heading towards these diminishing points. So let's start by looking at what an end product looks like. Here's a city drawn in 2-point perspective. As you can see, all the vertical edges are drawn straight up and down, perpendicular to the bottom of my page, all being parallel to each other, while the top edges, or the horizontal edges, are either heading, if I continue to draw the line, they will end up at one of those diminishing points. Now notice how the top of the right face is heading towards the right diminishing point, and the top of the left face, those lines would lead to the left diminishing point. So the buildings in this example are all above the horizon line, so we can't see the roof line. It makes it a little bit easier to draw. So let's go ahead and get started with your own drawing. And the first thing you're going to do is you're going to draw this line across the middle of your paper, and that's called the horizon line. And notice my 2 little red dots here in my drawing. Those are my diminishing points. Once I have my horizon line, I'm going to start by drawing the front edge of my first building. Now in this example, the first building is going to have the roof below the horizon line, so I'm going to be able to see the roof. In other words, when I draw my front edge, the top of that line is going to be below the horizon line. So I'm going to make a pretty small building here, and here's the front edge of the first building, and that's where you always start a building, with that front edge. Now I need to draw in my guidelines, because I need to draw these horizontal lines all heading to these horizon point, or these diminishing points. I'm going to put in lighter gray lines here, and I call those my guidelines, to make sure that I'm drawing lines that are on track to head to those diminishing points. So from the top and bottom of my front edge, I draw these guidelines that go all the way to my 2 diminishing points. Now I'm ready to put in the other edges of my building, the left and the right. Now notice I try to make these completely parallel, and the top and bottom of these lines are going to meet those guidelines. So now I have the front 3 edges. Now look how I need the back lines, the back edges, because I can see my roof. So the next thing I'm going to do from the 2 new edges that I've put in is I'm going to draw guidelines heading to those diminishing points again. So on this rightmost edge, I'm going to draw a guideline heading to the left diminishing point. And from my left edge, I'm going to put in a guideline going to the right. And now you can kind of see the top of the building kind of getting sketched out. Okay, the next step is to use those guidelines and put in the darkened edges that I actually want on my final building. So now I have my first building below the horizon line, so I can see my roof. Whenever I grade these, I always will draw the lines in, extending each of your lines to make sure that if I extend any line in this picture, that they are going to head to one of these diminishing points, unless they're the vertical lines. Okay, so now we're on step 7. We're ready to add our second building. So once again, I start with the front edge. And this time I'm going to make a building above the horizon line, because that's one of the requirements in the project. So now I'm really following the same steps that I had before. From the top of this edge, I'm making my guidelines heading to each of my diminishing points. So I have the lines that I'm going to draw the top edges on. And now I'm ready to finish that building, just like I did the shorter building, except for I don't have to worry about back lines because I can't see my roof. So the next thing I do is I put in my 2 vertical lines, and then I connect the top edges on those guidelines. I also put in the bottom edge of this building as well. So now I have a building above the horizon line and one below. The next requirement in this project is a building on the horizon line. To add the building on the horizon line, I start the building the same way I did the first 2. I make the front edge, only now the height of that edge is going to stop right here at a horizon line. Now I'm going to finish off that building just like I did the other ones, except for notice here that I don't need guidelines because my horizon line is my guideline. If I draw a line from the top of this front edge to each diminishing point, they're both going to fall on the horizon line. So even though the top of this building is flat, you still get that three-dimensional feeling because the bottom is not. Okay, it's following to those points. So that's what a building looks like that's right on the horizon line. Okay, the last requirement in this project is a building behind all the other buildings. So to make this building, I start once again with the front edge, and just be careful that you do not put any edges in that you wouldn't see. So as I draw this front edge, I'm going to stop here at the top of my other building because I won't be able to see those edges of the building because it's back behind the other buildings. Then I once again put in my guidelines from the top of that line to each of the diminishing points, and then use that guideline to finish drawing my building. The last step in drawing your city is to put in your details. You can see here where I'm starting to add in sidewalks and roads and details onto the buildings. So I'm going to put in some of my lines here that would be like the floors. Now notice all these guidelines I've added in here. And that's because every time I draw a line that represents a floor on my building, I have to make sure that that's still on a guideline heading to these diminishing points. So the detail can be, we also want to make sure that those lines are following that same guideline, that all horizontal lines are heading to the diminishing point. Now the last step is to remove any of the guidelines that I don't want in my finished product. So now you can see I've removed my guidelines, so that all I have left are the actual buildings that I've drawn, and you can't really see the guidelines I used to draw them. Now, for the purposes of this project, there are a few things that you want to make sure that you have included in your project. First of all, you need to have 2 buildings where the top of the building is above the horizon line. And you want these in accurate 2-point perspective. And that's worth 10 points. So I'm going to be looking at those buildings, checking to make sure that all your lines that are horizontal are heading to one of those diminishing points. Then you want to make sure you have a building with the tops on the horizon line. And you need one of those. And I showed that here in this video. Then you need a 4th building with the top below the horizon line. And that was the very first building I made where you could see the roof. Okay, so that's a total of 5 points per building. So that's your first 20 points. Then I want you to add at least 5 interesting components such as signs, street lights, trees, balconies into your drawing. And in this case, I was putting in the floors on one of the buildings, and I put in a kind of an archway. I was starting to put in, I think I was going to put a parking ramp in there, something like that. And then 10 points are, you will receive 10 points for making sure that all the horizontal lines are heading to the vanishing points. Okay, and that is your project. That is the last part 4 of the project, and we'll have some help sessions that you can attend if you're having trouble drawing this. Now you can draw this either in GeoGebra, you can draw it on paper and scan it, or you can use some other software. The example here that I used was actually a paint program. Well, good luck and have fun with your project, and I can't wait to see them.